So, A Quiet Place Day 1 just came out on streaming, and I figure it's time to do a review. If you want to watch it, it's available on Paramount Plus. It is the third installment in the Quiet Place series, and while the other two are mainly set after the apocalypse, Day 1 is unique. As the name would suggest, it is set at the start of the apocalypse, thus making this movie a prequel to the other two movies. However, it is much closer to a spin-off as it follows a mostly unrelated cast compared to the other two movies, which is actually one of this movie's strengths. You don't have to have seen the other movies in the Quiet Place series to enjoy this movie. It allows you to connect with this movie's story without having to worry about the other two. So, before I get into my thoughts on this movie as a whole, let me give you a brief rundown of the movie itself. The movie centers around Sam, played by Lupita Nyong'on, and I will say Lupita is the heart and soul of this movie, and she does an amazing job. She's accompanied by her cat Frodo, and they together live in New York, which is also a great setting for an end-of-the-world movie. Sam is battling cancer and seems to have given up. The movie does a nice job on using that backstory to build and influence her core motivations as a character as the movie goes on. As the movie gets rolling, it doesn't take long for the obvious to happen. All hell breaks loose when the creatures start attacking New York City. The creatures are completely blind and only attack based on sound alone. However, it does not appear that the creatures are hunting for food, as most of the time when they're attacking things, they're just attacking anything with sound to destroy it. This leads into the focus of the movie itself, how Sam and Frodo survive during the apocalypse. Eventually, as the story goes on, we'll be introduced to our other main character, Eric, played by Joseph Quinn, an English law student who is currently living in New York for school. The chemistry between Sam and Eric is spot on. They are clearly just two people at the end of the world desperately seeking a friend, and this really does lead to some magical moments between the two throughout the movie. So, let's get into what this movie does well. This movie does extremely well with the pacing of the movie. It allows time for the plot to slow down and just focus on the small human elements during the end of the world. It then also makes sure to ramp up to some amazing action scenes as you would expect with these sorts of monsters laying waste to New York City. It will also keep you extremely stressed out throughout whenever a person makes a sound. It knows when to ramp up your emotions and when to let them simmer for a bit. On the thought of stressing the viewer out, if you love cats, Frodo the cat will get your heart racing throughout this movie. He will run off at the worst times that do make sense for the scene, but will stress both you and the character out. There were plenty of times I found myself yelling, "Get the cat! Get the cat!" I will admit, there are a few times I found myself thinking that the cat knew something about what was going on. Not something I can directly point to, but there are a few times I feel like the cat is used more to move the plot along, and not something that would make 100% sense for the cat to do motivation-wise. But either way, I did very much enjoy the added stressor the cat introduced to this movie. Another aspect that this movie does well, similar to the other movies, is it knows how to convey the motivations of the characters and the tension of the scene without saying much. It obviously has to because the characters are barely able to talk without the monsters being drawn to them. However, the other two movies got around the lack of ability to talk with most of the characters using sign language. What sets this movie apart is none of the characters use sign language throughout this movie. This results in them being a lot more quiet, a lot less talking, outside of the times when they're able to talk that the monster won't hear. Thus, this movie has to rely even harder on conveying emotions through body language, and it does this extremely well. The final ingredient that makes this movie so good is that it focuses on the aspect of the world that the previous two movies didn't really focus on. Things like what would the military do when these creatures first showed up, showing scenes with large groups of people and how that could possibly draw the creatures, or even just focusing on the fact that once something like this happens, you have very little hope of getting evacuated. It even slightly builds on the nature of the creatures themselves. All that plays into setting this movie apart from the other two. All in all, this movie is filled with great acting, big action scenes, sweet human moments, and enough stressful save the cat moments to easily keep you entertained, especially with its modest runtime. With that being said, I give this movie a 3.0 out of 4. I was debating a 3.5, and I'd love to give you an exact reason why it's not 3.5. Honestly, the best explanation I can give is there are certain movies that are going to stick with you for long after the runtime. And unfortunately, just like the other two movies, I really enjoyed this movie. But outside of one scene with Eric and Sam that is truly heartwarming, I don't think it will have a lasting impression in my mind. It is definitely worth a watch though. So check it out on Paramount Plus today. This has been SOS Movie Reviews, putting the review back in the reviewer, signing off.